It's a theological world after all, after all, after all, after all.
Well, welcome back. It's a theological world after all. One of the great assumptions of the modern age is that we are our brains. Consciousness is often treated as little more than a byproduct of neural activity, and death is viewed as the final cessation of personal existence. Yet for centuries and increasingly in recent decades, there have been reports that challenge these assumptions. Many people are familiar with the near-death experiences, those extraordinary reports that occur when individuals come close to death and later recover. Fewer people are aware of out-of-body experiences, and even fewer still have heard of deathbed visions, or deathbed experiences, you might call them, or shared death experiences. Reports of dying individuals, family members, nurses, hospice workers, who together describe unusual experiences occurring in the final moments of life. These reports raise fascinating questions. What should we make of them? Are they merely products of a dying brain? Do they point to dimensions of a human experience that our current scientific work or data struggles to account for? And what might they tell us about consciousness, personal identity, the soul, survival beyond bodily death? Today, we're joined by Stephen Miller, whose research is focused on particularly these questions. Our goal is not to sensationalize extraordinary experiences, nor to claim more than the evidence allows. Rather, we want to explore what these phenomena are, what the research actually says, what questions remain unanswered, and why all of this really matters, not only for science and philosophy, but also for theology, pastoral ministry, and the way ordinary people think about death itself. Steve is a teacher. He's teaching at Talbot School of Theology. He's also a professor of philosophy at Kennesaw State University. So, Steve, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Joshua.
I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thanks for taking the time out. We met just a few months ago now. It seems like it was longer. Time is moving quick. It's been full. But March, I think we met at a regional EPS conference, Evangelical Philosophical Society conference. And so that was great. So I got to meet you and learn about your work, which I'm fascinated by. And I want to think a little more carefully about some of these issues that you've been writing on. And you've written 3 books now on these issues. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. And you're working on another or recently finished one. Is that correct?
I really have 2 more so far. It's like I'll get into the research and find out, well, really I've got 2 books here, so I'd better spread it out. The more I research, the more I come up with. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of material that is underdeveloped right now. So let's spend some time just trying to think through the phenomena, trying to understand the phenomena, so our listeners can help make some distinctions. I think this directly relates to interests that I have in soul science ministries and what we kind of talk about here on It's a Theological World After All. And so I want to look at this and then think with you about like implications this has for a wide set of kind of more practical issues as well. What is a deathbed experience? What is a deathbed experience?
This is rather ill-defined, so in researching deathbed experiences, let me back up a little bit. I was studying near-death experiences, which since 1975, when Raymond Moody exposed the world really to near-death experiences through his book, Life After Life, people became fascinated with this. And these were experiences where let's say someone has a cardiac arrest, experience clinical death, which is cessation of breathing, cessation of heartbeat, and then they're resuscitated. Well, during that time, you're not supposed to have any consciousness and certainly aren't able to lay down memories because your brain is basically stopped. I mean, it goes down just very quickly for up to maybe 20 or 30 seconds. It goes down and then you're unconscious. So when you're resuscitated, people should ask you from a naturalistic standpoint, they ought to, you ask them what happened during that time. You say, well, nothing. I went unconscious, I passed out, and then I came back, nothing. But instead, people would come back with these stories which had consistent elements, maybe 15 to 17 elements that were recurring. So it wasn't like a hallucination or a dream that's so varied, or a DMT or LSD experience, which is so incredibly varied like hallucinations are. But they would leave their bodies. They would talk about the hospital scene where they were, talk about what happened, and much of this could be confirmed later by very good cardiologist scientists who studied these things, that they could confirm, yes, that's what was happening while you were clinically dead. What you described actually happened. So there's corroboration there. Well, I was just shocked 15 years ago when I got into the research to find out that there had been wonderful research, peer-reviewed journals, actually a peer-reviewed journal dedicated to near-death experiences, but it's relevant to nurses and doctors because they need to know when somebody is dying or somebody's had a heart attack and they start talking about seeing things on the other side. Do I send them to the psych ward? Do I need to adjust the morphine? Or is this something that is very meaningful to them, perhaps even real?
Yeah.
And it is not just a physical thing. So that's why you're seeing all this research in top medical journals like The Lancet, one of the top medical journals we have, and they'll have studies of near-death experiences. Now, in studying that, I decided, okay, I want to go see what the best research says. Let's get away from all the YouTube videos and all the sensationalism, the paperback books that are written by people we don't know and don't know whether to trust them or not. But looking at the research, I wanted to bring that together so that naturalists and atheists and Christians and whoever's reading it could just see what the research is showing. So I did that with near-death experiences. But in that study, I found that there had been a really well-done study back in the 1950s and 60s of deathbed visions, DBVs. And this is what happens not when you have a heart attack and you're brought back to life, but at the end of life, when you're about to experience your final death and people start talking about visiting with deceased relatives or angels or Jesus, all of a sudden getting excited, maybe about going to the other side, when you would think they would just be devastated, leaving their families, and even little children dying, getting excited about going to this place that feels more at home than on this side. And so this study had been done of doctors and nurses that had experienced, a total of maybe 50,000 deaths. And so these were people who were experts at watching people die in the United States and in India. And these two researchers had done just some really well done research that was not Christians from a theological school trying to prove Christianity. But they came to the conclusion that these people are actually experiencing something outside of their bodies, something that's real, and that this did confirm an afterlife. So I thought, okay, this would make a good, tidy little doctoral dissertation. So I went ahead and found a place that would let me research deathbed visions and deathbed experiences. Columbia International University, they let me do my dissertation. It ended up being about 400 pages because I thought, okay, maybe I could have 100 good articles that I could find, But when I got up to 500 and over that, I thought, oh my goodness, we have missed out on a rich vein of research.
Yeah.
And so deathbed experiences, to me, the way I'm defining it, encompasses really a range of experiences. There's the deathbed vision, where a person is just about to die and starts talking about what they're seeing. It's like they're transitioning to the other side. Then there are crisis apparitions, where someone dies that you didn't even know the person was sick. Maybe they're on another continent. And then you have a vision of that person as if they're saying goodbye to you. You've never had a vision like that before. And then you find out, sure enough, they died at that within 24 hours of when that vision happened. This was studied by some researchers at Oxford University years ago. Then there are shared death experiences where I was in Texas visiting my brother who was being treated for cancer at the wonderful cancer facility there in Houston. And we were talking to a nurse about these things, and she said, oh, a cold shiver goes down my spine. I never tell anybody this, but since you're studying this, I saw this little girl who had been badly burned, and suddenly I saw her spirit coming out of her body, perfect, not burned, a perfect, like body-like substance coming out, going to heaven. And she doesn't have any reason to be lying to me about this, but you can't explain this away as symptoms of a dying brain. If this nurse's brain was not dying, that was a shared death experience. So there's several types of experiences that happen surrounding death that I'm putting together as deathbed experiences.
Right. Good. So would this be one specified kind of area of focus that would fit under the description of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, or would it be really distinct from
That's an
NDE?
interesting question, because although I don't see the two experiences conflicting with one another, they are different experiences. So in a near-death experience, a person's gone brain dead from clinical death, and they see themselves coming out of their bodies, looking down surprised that, who is that down there? Oh my goodness, that's me. They're out of their bodies. Then a deathbed vision, these people are still in their bodies. They're having a vision of the afterlife, but they're also talking to the people in the room. They may talk to the person in the room and say, and you see that some of these are not on morphine, not on any drugs. They're perfectly lucid, and they're talking to this person that's a family member that's in the room and saying, do you see the angel that's there at the foot of my bed? Because I see it distinctly, and we're having this conversation mind to mind while you're doing that, or I'm seeing this beautiful scenery, or you'll have a child that's been going downhill for a long time. Maybe something's eating away at their brain. They're no longer conscious for weeks, and then suddenly experience terminal lucidity, which is another kind of deathbed experience. And they suddenly are perfectly normal, perfectly lucid. They shouldn't be, because their brain should be pretty much gone by now. And yet they'll say their goodbyes, and then almost always that day or a few hours later, they pass away. It's like they're given a chance to say a final goodbye before they go. So that's experienced in their bodies, the near-death experience out of their bodies.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So near-death experiences, at least, there does seem to be some overlap experientially between these to some extent, but near-death experiences, you would categorize as those experiences where the person has already been deemed clinically dead or brain dead, but deathbed experiences are nearing that, but not they're not clinically dead yet.
They're
not
nearing
pronounced fit.
they're nearing their final death.
Right.
Whereas
right,
with a near-death experience, it's a temporary death. And we see
right.
that distinction in scriptures as well. Look at when Jesus was raising Lazarus from the dead, and he's kind of delaying coming, and he says that this is not an illness that's to death. Well, that the definition of death he's using there is this is not his final death. He knew he was going to experience a temporary death, and later he says Lazarus is dead. Well, that wasn't a final death. At that point, he's using the word to mean a temporary death. So I think people get confused with Hebrews when it says that, that it's appointed for man once to die, and after this comes judgment. They think, well, what about a near-death experience? They're not experiencing judgment or even a deathbed experience. But both of these experiences are prior to your final death.
Okay.
So especially a near-death experience is more of a halftime experience than after the fourth quarter's ended.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
But both would have implications for the mind-body issue, because
Absolutely.
even in a deathbed vision, when you're not experiencing it outside of your body, you're experiencing often deceased relatives who are very much alive on the other side, who have maybe died decades ago.
Right.
And so both of these give to me evidence that needs to be considered for the separation of mind and body, substance dualism, as well as the afterlife.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. I was reminded of my my grandma. I remember talking to her. She was nearing the end. She was on her deathbed, and I was just talking to her, asking her questions, and trying to encourage her, this is not the end. And she said, oh, I know she said something to the effect of, how did she put it? She put it like, I'm listening to, a choir of angels or something right now. And it's the most beautiful sound that I've never heard before. And so she hadn't died yet. She wasn't pronounced clinically dead. I guess, might that be categorized as a deathbed experience?
Yes, that would be specifically a deathbed vision. And when I'm assessing the evidence, some people will say, well, there's no real evidence there unless you're the person experiencing it. But when I look at both near-death and deathbed experiences, I see about 12 lines of evidence within each experience, some of which are differ. It's not the same types of evidence, but that fit better with the afterlife hypothesis than the dying brain hypothesis. And that's just abduction. We use it in science all the time. Where I know Dr. Reese talking about the evidence for the Big Bang says that, well, okay, I saw this evidence, but it wasn't until the 1990s when I saw this other evidence. So what he's doing is abduction. He's saying, let's look at all the facts as we have them and what hypothesis best fits that. And he says, well, there was a beginning to the universe. Same thing that we're doing with near-death experiences. I think this is scientific. We're saying, we've got plenty of studies that have gone on in the past. Let's assess the best data from these experiences. Does that fit better with just a dying brain, or are they really experiencing something for real? And that, to me, okay, the thing you just mentioned about, it's not just that they heard pretty music and, oh, it sounds like the Beatles, or it sounds like this or that.
Yeah.
But it's like a music that I've never heard before.
Right.
Where does that come from neurologically? The same thing with colorblind people seeing colors, or people who can see colors go to the other side and they say, some of these colors I can't describe to you because there's nothing here on earth that color. I've never seen it before. Or people who are blind, born blind, who don't have any memories to pull from, reporting seeing the same things. So you've got to ask neurologically, where is that information coming from if they don't even have they don't even have a concept of color,
Right.
and yet they're seeing colors, or they're hearing music that's different, or they're speaking mind to mind. That's been both near-death and deathbed experiences when they're not used to doing that. Why would all these people, if these experiences are being formed by your expectations, people just aren't expecting that.
Yes.
These are things they're not expecting, and yet there they are. To me, that fits better with the fact that maybe these are real experiences with the other side, because they're coming back with things that they can't even express sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Where do you get that from? Yeah. 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 In some of the literature on the kind of the philosophy of experience, which you're familiar with, there are times where there are descriptions where, people start to I forget what this is called, but they have experiences and perceptions where their different sensual senses tend to overlap or maybe even collapse. So in some ways that you can, and maybe this is similar to drug-induced experiences, where sometimes people begin to experience the feel of a color, and they describe the feeling of a color. I wonder if, from what I recall, I think there were some experiences like this of deathbed encounters where they're experiencing something so real and clear, very lucid, of something beautiful, different kinds of colors that they don't have a name for. They didn't learn it in this life. It's something new, altogether new.
That's why Moody, in 1975 with his book, he had like 150 near-death experiences that he was pulling from that people had taught them about. And he would say that's one of the characteristics is ineffability. And it's not like the whole thing is ineffable. I mean, if they see a deceased relative, they say it's a deceased relative, right?
Yeah.
But then other things, they're saying, it was kind of like I was going through a tunnel, but it's not exactly like a tunnel. It's just, and they have to, and you actually read this sometimes in the Bible where it will talk about it was like a beast that was this. They're having that same ineffable issue that they can't describe. They're just having to give analogies, or it's sort of like, you'll see it in Revelation, I believe Ezekiel as well.
Yeah.
But notice that it'll say like, and you're saying, oh, okay, this is ineffable. And that is one of the characteristics.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. I was thinking about maybe the kind of overlap relationship with dreams. I've had certain dreams at times that are, they seem very real, and maybe they're not. They could just be collections of memories. I mean, sometimes we don't have to get in the spiritual side of dreams right now, but there could be something there. I mean, sometimes, I do believe strongly sometimes that God is working in through dreams. Sometimes Satan is working in order to kind of insert certain ideas that you didn't otherwise have, or feelings that you didn't otherwise have, that are a bit intrusive. You might call them intrusive. But there were some experiences where I had of persons, but I never would see their face, but you can feel them. I mean, it's a similar feeling experience that you've had of them in real life, that but you're not seeing them like you would normally in real life. And so our perceptual, phenomenological experience sometimes does give way to this kind of phenomena where there are there's something real going on, something experiential, but it's not so contained or controlled, boxed in by maybe bodily limitations or sensual limitations.
Or your past experiences and memories.
Past experiences. And yeah, that's right. That's right.
I kind of suspect, I don't know what you think, but in the Old Testament, it would talk about somebody having a dream, and then they would desperately want this interpretation. Now, it never actually says this, but I suspect that this was not just a normal dream. For some reason, there was something that separated it out where it was really a dream vision, because the king or whoever had the dream is desperate to get an interpretation. And it wasn't that they just thought all dreams had meaning. I feel like those dreams were special.
Right.
And so, and I'll just tell you honestly, the only time I've had an experience that might have been this was when I started Bible college, was training for the ministry. One night I had this vivid dream that Satan was torturing me, and I was calling out to God for help, and he was just laughing. I didn't tell this to anyone that I'd had it, because it wasn't edifying to anyone.
Right.
But I think so I woke up immediately after it. I walked out in the hallway and wrote it down and said, I just had a dream, or was it a dream? And I wrote it down because it was so significant. Now, I wish I'd told people about it, because since then, now I'm talking to people, very rational people, very educated people, who say, yeah, I've had an attack of the enemy like that and dealt with it. I think if I'd started telling my friends who are training for ministry, they might have said, I've had one like that. And I think Satan knew that I'm a doubter, questioner by nature. And if he could raise doubts in my mind as to whether God was really on my side or whatever, what a great way to do it.
Yes.
So,
right.
So I'm not alone. Let me throw out some figures to you here. This is why what we're talking about is so important. This is not something happening off in a corner somewhere, but 4% of people in good surveys, United States, Germany, and in Australia, I know of these 3 surveys, at least 4%, 4 to 6% of the population claims they've had a near-death experience. Now, that's 1 in 25 of Americans, or 13 million Americans. 20%, and this is either United States or United Kingdom, this is where these studies came from, 20%, that's 1 out of 5, claim they've had visions of evil entities. So what I experienced is not strange.
Yeah.
Apparently a lot of people are having those. 23% have had a vision in response to prayer. About a third have seen a deceased loved one. That's another type of deathbed, what I'm putting under deathbed experiences. 43% have had some kind of a special spiritual experience, they would call it. 44% claim to have seen an angel or been protected by an angel. 82% have been very conscious of God at least once in their lives. And 80 to 80% deathbed visions. If you're, this is a recent study done in a New York hospice, where they didn't just ask the doctors and nurses, what have you seen, but they were allowed to actually interview the patients daily when they did this. This is dying patients in a hospice. 80 to 88% of them were experiencing these deathbed visions where they were seeing deceased relatives. And typically, this is if somebody starts talking about they're seeing deceased relatives or angels or great beauty on the other side, the nurses that are in the know say, okay, no matter what you think, this person's close to death. They're just transitioning right now, which is significant.
Yes.
So what we're talking about is something that maybe everybody by the time they die is going to have had at least one vision.
Yes.
So why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't I hearing sermons on this? I've been going to church all my life. And yet, and they'll talk about a vision that's in the Bible, but how many are saying, hey, we need to minister to you guys who are having experiences like this, because this is not odd. This is not just crazy people. Normal people, just like in biblical times, are reporting visions today, and we need to be able to minister to those people.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I want to explore that a little more with you. Yeah, and before we get into, I wanted to look at some other things, some other items related to the evidence in your research on it. Um, but I want to go back to this question about the kind of the description, getting after the description a bit more. Why have deathbed experiences not received as much attention? So there might be, so generally speaking, within the churches, they've received less attention, but also, it seems to me, based upon what you're saying, they've received less academic attention, even compared to what has been kind of received a lot more writing and attention, namely near-death experiences, which are distinct. It would seem like there's a lot more data within deathbed experiences that are untapped and unexplored, not carefully reflected upon. Is that right? What do you make of that question?
Yeah, there's been a huge amount of research that's gone on since 1975. I think Moody's book, it was translated into a lot of languages, best-selling book. And really, if you're interested in this, read his book. He's not coming at it from a Christian perspective, but I think everything he saw there was consistent with Christianity. I never saw anything inconsistent with it. He was just brought up with an atheist father, surgeon, who didn't have much spiritual background. And he was an honor student at the University of Virginia studying philosophy. He got his PhD in philosophy.
Yeah.
And while he was there, he was reading Plato's Republic. And toward the end of the Republic, there's an account of a soldier who died in battle and then was thrown up on a heap of bodies and came back, was resuscitated. And he came back with a story of seeing like heavenly and hellish things on the other side. Well, Moody was fascinated with this. He had not been brought up in a religious background. And he asked his professor about it. And his professor said, "Oh, you ought to talk to this psychiatrist on campus who's highly respected. And he had one of those experiences." So he went and heard the man talk, who told of his experience when he had died as a young person. He had some kind of lung illness or whatever, just something that just kept getting worse and worse, respiratory illness, and finally died. And he was actually written out a death certificate.
Yeah.
So when he taught his students at the University of Virginia, he passed around his death certificate. And Moody's like, "Oh my goodness, it's happened twice." You know, to back then, and here's a present day person. And this person saw Jesus. He became very evangelical about his faith. And so Moody actually told this person, "I want to dedicate this to you." And he said, "Well, I would rather you dedicate it to Jesus because he was the one who was all about the experience." And so in Life After Life, he didn't want this to be a Christian book. So he said to George Ritchie, MD, and through him to the one with a capital O whom he suggested. So really, this book was dedicated to Jesus.
Yeah.
So this just took the world by storm. And imagine it, to me, through the 1900s, late 1800s, 1900s, materialistic, reductionistic, naturalistic, materialism had pretty much taken the world by storm. And I think we all became embarrassed by the supernatural, so that we just didn't talk about visionary experiences anymore. Because obviously there's some psychological explanation, and we don't want people to think we're crazy. In other cultures, they talk about these things that happen at death. But in the Western world, it just became taboo, right?
Right.
But all of a sudden, Moody comes up with this book that says, wait a minute, these experiences are widespread. Let's look at the experiences. Like physicist John Wheeler said, take the strangest thing in your field and go explore it.
Yes.
Well, that's what quantum physicists have obviously done.
Yeah.
But why not do that with religious experiences. We just ignored it. So this took the world by storm. People began to say, okay, Dr. Sabom says, a cardiologist who was teaching at Emory School of Medicine. Later he began that, but he was challenged. He said that stuff doesn't happen to my patients. So he went in to do a study. This was shortly after Moody's book was published, and he actually did more of a scientific study of his patients, people that he could corroborate with the doctor records to say, oh, this person said this happened while they were clinically dead, and we're corroborating this with the hospital records.
Yeah.
And he took one group that had had cardiac arrest and claimed to have a near-death experience, another group that had experienced clinical death but did not have a near-death experience as a control group, asked both groups, what happened? What do you think happened during your resuscitation? The ones who claimed to have seen it from outside the body always got it right. He said one of these people explained it in such detail, I could have used it to train young cardiologists in what happens with resuscitation.
Wow.
And he said it's different. It's different with every person. The things that are going on, the conversations that are going on. Some of them are shocked. Some of them are just pounded upon. Some are given an injection, and yet they always got it right. And then the people who did not have a near-death experience, he said, okay, just guess what happened. That way he could see, or is this other group just pulling from what they've seen on TV? And they always got it wrong in significant details. So Dr. Sabom, after a year of study, he said, he came into this thing kicking and screaming, but he said, these people have been outside their bodies.
Wow.
So when you got studies like him, Dr. Others, then it was replicated in Holland by Dr. von Lommel, doing a prospective study with several hospitals. So these studies just developed and were getting published. Dr. von Lommel's was published in the Lancet. Okay, that's as high as you can get with credibility. So everybody started gravitating. What is this about? What is this? And it's practical, because nurses and doctors need to know what to do with people who are claiming to have these experiences. Do we adjust the morphine, or what do we do? So that became a big thing. And it's really not until recently when, in recent years, it's not been until that study of in the New York hospice that people have been taking the deathbed experiences seriously. But if you think of it historically, it's really more the deathbed experiences that people have talked about. I mean, look at Stephen in the New Testament. He's being martyred. He looks up, he sees Jesus, welcoming him to the other side. And throughout church history, you see martyrs having these experiences. That's one of the future things I want to study out. John Wesley, in his travels in the 1700s, he collected these deathbed experiences because he thought they were very significant for letting people know that Christians can die well because they're really going to the other side. Let's talk about what's happening at death. But somehow, in evangelists like D.L. Moody would mention them, Billy Graham would mention some deathbed experiences, but typically we just backed away from that in the 1900s. Now we need to get back on board and say, if 80 to 80% of the dying are experiencing these, we need to know what's going on. And let's look at the evidence.
Right. It's almost like we, in our more public-facing way, when we describe someone's experience, or we describe what's happening to them, we've almost cut off or excised these deathbed experiences because they've already been dismissed and treated as a priori, in a kind of a priori way, as phenomena that are just illusory or something, or delusions. We don't take it as objective fact or scientific, so it's not relevant. It's irrelevant altogether. So,
And
yeah,
often
maybe that
what
is
I find is
conditioning.
these people will try to share their experience with a loved one, and they get, or with their pastor. This often happens. The pastor will just kind of cut them off and say, that's not in the Bible, and we'll just leave it there. Now,
Yeah.
you're asking some pastoral questions.
Yes. Yes.
Pastorally, can't we obey the admonition to be quick to hear, slow to speak?
Yes.
I think we need to, visions are all through the Bible, Genesis to Revelation. We
Yes.
see secular people having visions, spiritual people having visions, people that are going the wrong way that need a warning, Paul giving direction through visions. If somebody's sharing a vision, we need to listen to it. Don't
Right.
pass judgment. 1 Thessalonians 5, he's talking about these type things like prophecies or whatever. We're not supposed to be naive, and the naive believes everything he hears. So we're not supposed to naively believe them all, but to naively dismiss them all as either of the devil or hallucinations or whatever. That's not biblical. The biblical thing is to do the hard work of testing the spirits, of looking and saying, okay, is that consistent with scriptures? Could it be a demonic deception? But if it's something that's bringing somebody closer to Christ, I think, back during Jeremiah's time, he was saying, why do you say, thus saith the Lord, when God hasn't spoken?
Yes.
It's a serious thing to dismiss something as satanic or a hallucination if it's really God working. And isn't that what they did to Jesus? They said, okay, you're working miracles, but it's of the devil.
Right.
And, well, that is a serious thing if you've not really done the hard work of, let's look at it. Could this be of God? Maybe it makes more sense that this is a real vision in a lot of cases.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there is a lot of biblical data for this, but it's almost like we've trained our eyes not to read this data, so we gloss right over it, miss it completely, and don't attend to it. We don't attend to it. So I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that these deathbed experiences, which I think you've made a good case, right? We have scriptural data that is supportive of this also, even if for evangelicals who are like, we need to get biblical. And well, we have biblical evidence for this as well that corroborates with actual personal experiences and a whole host of reports that are present. But I think there's been this kind of conditioning in a lot of evangelical Christianity, maybe back, I don't know, maybe it was in the 70s and 80s more so. It was very common that these sorts of experiences, which probably would have just been kind of conflated with near-death experiences, are often talked about by the New Agers, the cosmic consciousness gurus and the like, who themselves have done a lot more thinking about these things. I don't have numbers, but I maybe you do. I imagine they're the ones who have written on these things a lot more than Christians have written on these things, because Christians have kind of, in many cases, evangelical Christians have kind of eschewed it, like hand-waved it away as being something that's borderline occultic. And so that's, we need to be careful about that, right?
Yes. Yes. So it's just like in other areas, there are false preachers, there are good preachers, there are false prophets, but historically there have been, at least in the biblical times, true prophets. But you don't just look at the false prophets and say, therefore, there have never been any true prophets. I think that's what some people like John MacArthur, when he was writing on the Afterlife, had a couple of chapters denouncing near-death experiences. Well, what he did is he looked at some popular literature by people who were claiming to have had New Age type near-death experiences or more easily reconciled with Mormonism than Christianity. And he just feels the need to tell people, listen, we get our doctrine of the afterlife from the Bible, not from people's experiences. He says these experiences are either of the devil or hallucinations, or people are just fabricating them. Well, okay, if you read some of the potentially fabricated experiences, yes, I agree with MacArthur. We need to warn people against just believing anything they hear. There's a lot of money that has been made through people publishing bogus stories about this. And one of the authors was named Malarkey. We should have thought about it. I mean, that was their actual name, was Malarkey. And they wrote a book about a child's experience, and it turned out later the child said, no, it never happened. My dad was just wanting the money. But it was like a best-selling book, I believe, by Tyndale House. So the whole Christian publishing industry at that point started saying no more heaven tourism books. We're going to stay with the Bible, stay away from those experiences. I think we overreacted because MacArthur never looked at the good research that had been done on near-death and deathbed experiences, or seemingly looked at the ones that were that seemed to be perfectly legitimate visions from God.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there is something to be, I guess, weary of, but this is where things get, I mean, there's both, there's something real going on. There's something spiritual and real going on, and there's biblical attestation to it, and there's biblical evidence for it. There is a kind of, it does become tricky because there is kind of a tight, it becomes difficult to kind of, I guess, demarcate what experiences are actually telling us or conveying to us. I mean, so I remember talking to a lady who was a counselor and military counselor, and she, professed Christianity, and I've always found this really fascinating, her and my exchange. But she started getting into psychedelic drugs and utilizing that because that's on the rise right now with
Very
with
much
therapeutic
so.
treatments. It's on the rise, and so she became a big believer in it, and so she would use these psychedelic drugs in order to experience or have religious visions, or to trigger religious visions, and to have these kind of religious stories or journeys that she could go on in order to cure or help some of her past trauma or whatever. And in one of them, she actually says she encountered her dead son, who she always had these traumatic, she had this traumatic experience because he died, and she explains how depressed she was and how bad she felt that, she couldn't stop it from happening. And so she relays this encounter, and I thought, well, that seems to me to fall directly under a kind of, occultic, what's the term in the Old Testament law that was actually condemned. That does seem somewhat problematic.
And I'll tell you one of the big differences there.
Yes,
that we really need to get to is what's condemned the Old Testament is seeking these experiences by going to a medium, for example. That is dangerous. In fact, if you've read the book by Richard Gallagher, Demonic Foes, he teaches
great book.
Psychiatry at Columbia University, one of the best psychiatric programs, I believe, most well respected. And so he's taught there all his life. He didn't really believe much in this demonic stuff going on, but began working with some people who were, I believe, mainly Catholics, who were saying, we need to differentiate between a psychological issue and what if it really is some kind of spiritual force. But in he became a believer when he realized that sometimes these people we're dealing with, and he was personally involved in counseling and exorcisms and whatever, they would know things about him that they couldn't have known, that nobody could have known. And so he said, something spiritual is going. And there were like 7 or 8 different characteristics. Some of them had superhuman strength. Some knew things they couldn't have known otherwise. There were a lot of things like that. But what some of these psychiatrists or some of these psychologists who are counseling people going to drugs to have these experiences, they may very well be opening up their minds to a spiritual side of things. That may be something, maybe it's just hallucinations, but maybe they are breaking through. Maybe our brain is in a large account a limiter that narrows down what we're seeing so that we're not going crazy seeing everything at once, everything on the side of the road or whatever. We just see what we need to. And the brain keeps us from experiencing the other spiritual side. Now, the problem that they're not dealing with is they're assuming that everything on the other side is good.
Yes.
Where biblically, we're going to say there's good stuff over there, there's bad stuff over there, and you don't want to get on an Ouija board or go to a medium and try to make contact. So if you make contact with somebody that claims to be your deceased wife or deceased child, how do you know that that's real? And how do you know, or maybe that's an imitation? And that's one thing that Gallagher found, was that sometimes beings would appear on the other side because they had gone to a medium or whatever, and they would claim to be angels or claim to be a deceased relative, and then later they would reveal themselves for what they really were, which was something demonic. So there's great danger here, especially if you're trying to seek the experience, whether it be through deep meditation, psychedelic drugs, or going to a medium. And by the way, probably 20% at least of near-death or deathbed experiences are distressing. They are experiencing something that's hellish, they call them, on the other side. And this has been well documented, although it was largely ignored in a lot of the early near-death studies. Now they say, no, that's a characteristic, and often they're seeing demonic type beings, great panic, fear, beings being tortured on the other side. This is a part of it that really can't be ignored.
Yes.
So back to the New Age thing.
Yes.
One Nancy Evans Bush says in her book about distressing experiences, she said, if you think about it, 1975, when Moody started talking about near-death experiences, New Age was really kind of at a big high at that point, very prevalent. So, of course, some of these people, they're just people in academia that are studying this. Some of them were caught up in a New Age movement and would try to harmonize it with New Age thoughts. But at the same time, you had other people who were writing, like Dr. Rawlings, a cardiologist, very well-respected cardiologist who used to work for the Pentagon on some of our, future presidents and people there, very well-respected. He saw some hellish experiences that shook him up and got him on track with following the Lord. And he wrote several books, To Hell and Back and others, about these distressing experiences that he felt like were being ignored. Dr. Sabom, who I mentioned earlier, this shook him up spiritually, and he has been his whole life very dedicated to his conservative churches, active in these churches, because so there have been some good Christians writing on this and involved in some of the research and talking about it. But yes, there are others from other worldviews who are trying to, to harmonize it with their religious thoughts as well.
Yeah.
But that's just another reason that we need Christians on the forefront to be dealing with this, because if you look at the experiences, I mean, think about it. Not all religions are consistent with these experiences. I mean, let's say that you're involved in an Eastern religion that says God is just some universal mind and that at death we either are reincarnated or if we've completed our journey, we're going to just, our self is going to dissolve in this universal mind. Well, how does that harmonize with people having a near-death experience and seeing their relative who's not reincarnated as some animal or another person, they're themselves, they actually have their individuality still intact? That doesn't fit well with a lot of Eastern religions who say that there is no self, consistent self, or that it dissolves into this, other reality. So I think if you stay with the good research, that a lot of this fits better with Christianity than a lot of the other. Think about Islam. According to Islam, if you do a topical study of love in the Quran, typically it's talking about God does not love people who do this. God does not love people who do this, right? Love, selfless love is not a big thing. And anybody who's not a Muslim is not going to have a good relationship with God.
Right.
And yet, here we are in near-death experiences, and all these non-Muslims are seeing a loving God who loves them selflessly. Well, to me, that doesn't fit well with the Quran as I read it.
Yes.
So I think if you look at these experiences and compare worldviews, Christianity is a much better fit if you're staying with the best research and not getting off onto anomalous experiences that you'll get into if you search YouTube. Because it's going to send you YouTube's algorithm is going to send you the most anomalous experiences because they are the most interesting and the most liked by others, right?
Right. No, I think that's helpful. That's a good point. That's a good way to admonish Christians to kind of make distinctions and approach the data a bit more carefully. But so I think it's important to point out, right, that you pointed out that there are certain things in the Old Testament law that are condemned. You're not to pursue seeking divination, as when Saul went to the witch of Endor, and this would parallel, seeking tarot cards or psychic readings, but recognizing that also that in many cases those are real. Something real is occurring, very potentially real. Something very spiritually real is occurring. Even though it's condemned, it's wrong. It doesn't mean that just because it's wrong that there's nothing happening. But of course the law, God's law, His perfect law, tells us not to participate in certain things, or to, obviously we shouldn't participate in certain demonic activities. Doesn't mean that it's not real, but that should be contrasted with some of these other experiences that do occur in our lives that we should attend to and try to make sense of, especially as Christians. So we can't give it all up and give it to the New Agers to try to cipher through and work through this material, these reports that are so rich in terms of providing experiential content about the afterlife, about spiritual things.
I mean, think about it biblically. Think of the Transfiguration. People will say, well, the deceased can't come back and visit somebody. Well, look at the Transfiguration. You got two long dead Old Testament characters coming back, talking to Jesus, and the disciples are there to witness it. Well, at least in that situation it happened. Look at 2 Corinthians 12, where the Apostle Paul, now the Apostle Paul was almost killed at least once, he was often, it seemed like, at the point of death. So this could have been a near-death experience. He talks about the ineffability. He talks about whether I was in my body or outside my body. I'm not really sure.
Right.
So apparently either of those scenarios were possible theologically to Paul, which again argues for that the spirit can separate from the body. So we do see we see all kinds of visions. Why is it that Christians are so quick to say, oh, that's weird stuff, we better just stay away from that?
Right.
Somebody needs to be ministering to them. Let me give you a little quote here. Have you seen the book Encountering Mystery?
No,
So
it looks good though. I need to look that up.
this is Dale Allison, professor, longtime
Yes.
professor at Princeton University. And he had a vision early in life before he ever went to college that he said, the reason I ended up studying this in college and teaching it my whole life was because of something that happened when I was a teenager. And I found several professors who are professors today because they had these experiences, visionary experiences that they couldn't deny. But he talks
Yeah.
about near-death experiences in some chapters. He talks about other types of visionary experiences people have. But then toward the end, when he's clenching his deal here toward the end, he says, he puts out a challenge to Christians, and it's particularly to ministers. And he says, to have nothing worthwhile to say about events that typically matter deeply and are often associated with God is to be inept and, at least in this particular, irrelevant. What good is an underinformed religious leader who is at a loss or dismissive in the face of mystical raptures, unexpected occurrences at deathbeds, visions of self-luminous figures, or encounters with dead loved ones? But this is a guy, he's probably about at retirement age. He's been teaching at a very respected school for a lot of years. And he's saying, we need to take these visions seriously. Why aren't we talking about it, since it's a big part of people's lives? And typically when they experience it, it's self-authenticating. They just cannot deny it. They've sat down and thought about, what if this was just a psychological thing? And they'll say, no, think of it this way. You're a philosopher. So how do you know that we're really having this conversation now and that's not a dream?
Yes, right.
I would say when you're having a dream, you think that's real, as weird as it might be. You think it's real. But when you wake up, you say, this is a different quality of real.
Yeah.
So I have no doubt that I'm really having this conversation with you right now.
Right.
Why? Because it's so vividly real. Well, I was sitting across from a guy with a church I was a member of at the time, very well-respected person within the church. He was a minister of men, and he had died in a sepsis condition, apparently, and came back, or at least he was in very bad shape. Had a vision of some angels and had that discussion about whether it was time to come back or not. Obviously, they decided, yes, come back. So he's there talking with me. He doesn't tell anybody about this vision. You'd think he'd be broadcasting it to the men's group, but he said, no, I just don't feel like that's what it's for. But my pastor put me on to him and said, you might, since you're studying these, talk to him. Well, I asked, as interviewers do, psychologists, when they're interviewing, you ask the same question in several different ways to see what kind of response you'll get.
Yes.
And I asked him at one point, okay, just how real was it? And he said, it was, it was really, really real. And then later I'd say, is it kind of like a vivid dream, or just what degree of reality? Finally, after about the third rewording, he sat across the table from me and he said, Steve, it was real. It was as real as me sitting across from the table talking to you right now.
Wow.
And some people would say it was realer than real.
Yes.
And that's a typical response of people to these experiences. So I'm thinking, okay, a lot of people will say, well, this is evidence for the person that had it. If I ever had an experience like that, I guess I'd believe it too. And I'm like, okay, well, if this is a person that I know and respect, and he thinks much like I do about things, he's not the type that just believes everything is a work of God when he's looking around. He's really an objective thinker. And he's saying it was realer than real. I think I can pretty much know that if I'd had his experience, I'd be saying exactly the same thing he's saying. Right. So why can't I learn from his experience and say, yeah, I believe it's most likely that he really had this vision, really saw angels. Then I've had like 5 people I've talked to in my recent churches who had visions of Jesus. And I'll just tell you, Joshua, I've always struggled with doubts in my life, gone in and out of doubts. My study of apologetics through seminary really made me solid enough to go into ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But I still always felt like, the resurrection, I can come up to a 90% chance that happened historically.
Yeah.
But it was so long ago, Yes,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
good
right.
enough evidence to bet my life on, but I'm still up to 90%. But now when I'm talking to people that I know and trust and that are telling me, I saw Jesus, it was him. And I'm like, okay, that's it.
That's it.
He's
Yeah.
alive today. Why would God be showing us Jesus if Jesus was all off the mark and got everybody led astray? So I
Yeah.
don't have any more doubts. To me,
Yeah.
it's the icing on my apologetic cake. But you've got to actually study the research.
Right.
And then you start talking to individuals you know and trust.
Yes.
And it's just put that, signs and wonders in the Bible.
Yes.
Wonders in the sense that they're not expected according to the natural course of things. Okay,
Right.
that's a near-death experience, right? It's a wonder in the sense that you're not expecting people to have a story to tell after they were brain dead. So it's a
Right.
wonder, but it's a sign in that these point to something.
Yes.
You can't explain it away with God or the gaps by saying, oh, you're just throwing God in there to explain something that you can't explain. No. God's all over this thing. They're
Yeah.
experiencing God. So
right.
that is a legitimate hypothesis from the very start to say this is a God thing. This is about a spiritual world. This is about separating from your body, about spiritual realities. So it's a sign in the sense that it points to these spiritual realities as an explanation. And to
Yes.
me, that has brought me back to this, what I think is a New Testament world of chill down your spine, hair raising on your arm wonders.
Yes.
And it makes sense of what Paul's saying about that the kingdom of God is not about talk. So much of my Christian life has been about talk and wondering and reading and thinking. But he said it's about power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's brought that back to me. Now, I'm not a charismatic. I'm not a Pentecostal. Maybe I've just been walking in the wrong circles, but I've just not paid attention to these things until the last 15 years. And it has brought me to a new point of loving God, realizing these are the things that really matter. This life is just a little blip in eternity.
Yes.
So live for things that are going to last.
That's right. How much more reason do we need to attend to our souls in this life? Yeah.
What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose or forfeit his soul? And I think as an outcome of these experiences, that general thought is what permeates people's minds, that all of a sudden, if they were headed toward riches and raises and working their way up in some system, all of a sudden they realize that doesn't even matter.
It doesn't matter. No.
What matters is love God, love people, seek spiritual things. And typically it's not giving them the gospel outright, but I think it's just like with Saul. You see, you have this vision and then you seek, and if you seek, you're going to find.
That's right. Yeah. That's a good word. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good. Yeah. We've covered a lot. Yeah. Kind of a 30,000 foot view of deathbed experiences. This is, and especially as applied to some practical issues and some theological issues. I think this is important for Christians to think about a lot more carefully. So with that, kind of a broad question, there's several lines of thought that we could go down and explore further, but maybe just from your reflection, where do we still need to apply research along these lines of deathbed encounters, and where is theological reflection needed further today? Maybe
I thought about your question. You'd given me that one, and I've thought about it, and I think there's just been so much good research done over the years on both near-death and deathbed experiences. I mean, back in late 1800s, some guys at Cambridge University got serious about crisis apparitions where people are claiming to have seen someone who just died. And they went out and surveyed 17,000 people, typically around the area of Cambridge and Oxford. William James was actually a part of this research as well. Wrote up fantastic research on this. Not long later, you've got Cecile Flammarion, who's a very respected astronomer in France. He started studying these things early in his career, near death, deathbed, well, especially deathbed experiences, visionary experiences, wrote several volumes on them. They're great. And he'll give, okay, this is Count so-and-so from this country. This is the head of a hospital here. Here's his name. Very well-respected people. There's tons of great research done. So what I've tried to do in my books, and I'm not making a lot of money on these books. I'll, if you ask, if you don't have enough money, I'll send you the free PDFs. I'll just do that. jstevemiller@gmail.com. I'll send you free books. I'm not out for the money, but what I've tried to do is to pull together the best of near-death research and see what implications that has for God in the afterlife. The next book, let's look at deathbed experiences. What's the best research out there that I can pull together for you on that? Tons of footnotes documenting it that present-day researchers could say, okay, Steve's pulled it together for us. Now let's take it apart. And then one harmonize, just saying, does it really fit with Christianity and the Bible? So that's my third one, which is more of a theological look at things. So what I think is needed now is we need theologians and philosophers of religion to become familiar with this vast area of research enough to where they can apply it to what's going on in their field. So let's say your field of interest, let's say this body-soul thing, okay, well, people like J.P. Moreland and others have been applying that to that field and saying this is relevant to the field. Okay.
It is.
Very relevant. But you've got to know the research to be able to use it. And then, you have scientists that have written books on this. Egner, is it? Egner?
Michael Egner. Yeah,
So here he is, a neurologist, very well-respected neurologist, and he's applying that and saying, oh, yes, the brain is not all there is. The brain does not fully explain consciousness. So we have that working. But think of other fields. Think of, like the Evangelical Philosophical Association. They'll discuss people, atheists that are complaining about the hiddenness of God. Well, God just doesn't make himself as evident as he should. Well, what if this research on visions, if this is anywhere near correct, it's not just that we have a complex universe that has incredibly complex order that you can look at and see that, wow, something had to be behind this besides random chance. But God has actually revealed himself. I mean, people will say, oh, if God would just paint across the sky that he's there. Well, but if he did that, you'd suspect, is this a hallucination? You'd still have questions about it. But he's revealing himself to people directly in ways they can't deny. That doesn't sound like a very hidden God to me.
No.
And people like Shushan have studied this in past civilizations, in the most ancient of civilizations. They're talking about these things. He also has another book on indigenous tribes. Now, like, for example, American Indians, they would ask them, well, why do you believe in God in the afterlife? Well, so-and-so had this vision. And he told us about it, and he's a respected person, and they would give that as the reason. Well, anthropologists need to consider that and say, hey, maybe our whole idea that people came up with the God idea by seeing a rustling in the leaves and they couldn't see anything and attributed it to a deity. There's no real historical evidence for that. It's just a hypothesis. But isn't it more likely to say that people all through time have been having visions?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that this feeds
Yeah.
into why aren't anthropologists
Right.
talking about that? There's actual
Yes.
evidence for this, where the
Right.
other direction that so many of them go is just purely theory. What about theodicy, the problem of
Yeah.
evil? Why is there
Right.
so much evil in the world? Doesn't that reflect on God? Well, doesn't it impact theodicy when you take into account that I've never seen anybody come back from the other side of a near-death experience and say God is so unjust or God
Yeah.
is just a cosmic meanie?
That's a good
In
point.
fact,
Yeah.
in certain experiences people have, they'll go to the other side and say, while they're over there, now they can't say it all over here because their mind's not big enough. But when I was on the other side, I understood why I was born into the family I was born into, why these things had to happen to me, why so-and-so had to die. It all made sense to the nth degree as to why
Right.
things had to happen this way.
Yeah.
So that has implications for theodicy, that when we're talking about, okay, maybe God has a reason for things, for allowing so much evil, that has ultimately there's a good reason in the end for allowing this, for soul development or whatever, maybe 1,000 things. But
Sure.
a near-death experience, this confirms that line of thought. That
Yes.
when they get over there, they see a God who exudes agape, selfless love in a way that they can't imagine.
Right.
Well, doesn't that sound like the Bible? This
Yes.
unimaginable, undescribable love of God that it talks about?
Yes.
And yet they're experiencing it. So I think there's so many areas of theology and philosophy that this impacts. The afterlife, that's a part of philosophy. Okay,
Right.
well, but the current article I see in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is just kind of wishy-washy about near-death experiences. Yeah, they mention them, but kind of dismissive
Yeah.
of them. Well, I think
Yeah,
they need
right.
more to go more in depth to see what implications this really has for the afterlife.
Yes.
And
No,
that's one thing that's kind of been
that's good.
neglected by Moody and others. Moody
Yeah.
wanted to stay so far back, and I asked Moody about this one day on the phone. I said, why did it take you so long to say, yes, this is giving evidence for the afterlife? Instead, he would write a book, you'd see all this evidence, and then in the end, he'd say, oh, well, it's just anecdotes. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. We don't know.
what?
Yeah.
This used to just bug Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to death that he would do this.
Yes.
But he said, I just
Yeah.
saw myself as the always searching philosopher, and I was afraid if I drew a conclusion, I'd quit searching.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
but there's just for the afterlife. Oh my goodness, I believe there's strong evidence. But a lot of the researchers, because they're publishing in scientific journals, rather than coming out clearly and investigating the implications for the afterlife and mind-body separation, instead, they'll just say something very generic like, well, this seems to have problems for a reductionistic view, naturalistic view of the world, and just leave it at that,
Leave it at that.
rather
Yeah.
than saying,
Right.
wow, this kind of looks like God in the afterlife.
Right.
They're still hesitant to put that in the scientific journals. So it's up to Christian philosophers and theologians to get in and say, wow, if you're doing abduction and inferring to the best explanation, it sure looks like the afterlife hypothesis and the God hypothesis
Yes.
looks better than a naturalistic hypothesis. So those
That's
are
right.
some areas I think that researchers need to go. Take the area you're already interested in and see how this applies. I mean, John Wesley was using it as an apologetic to appeal to people and to get people more serious about God. Look at how people are dying. Well, can't pastors do that in their pastoral work and integrate it into their sermons as well, like the Wesleys and others have done?
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it seems so natural actually that we should be doing that, but we've been we need to be disabused of maybe we've been conditioned by materialism a bit more than we will readily grant, even our pastors. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. Well, this has been really good. Yeah. This has been really helpful, Steve. Thank you. This has been good. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking me seriously. I get so much
this is good stuff.
pushback from I like to tell people, the people that have the hardest time with near-death experiences are atheists and Christians. And so you kind of get pushback from both worlds. But I tell you what, my students, I have a little book called Faith That's Not Blind, where I give 17 lines of argument for the existence of God. And I'm in a secular university, and I ask them to rate the arguments on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being it's no evidence at all, 10 being, wow, there's got to be a God. And these near-death and deathbed experiences are some of the most powerful for my students. And often when they tell why it's that way, it's not necessarily the way that I argued it, but it's that they've experienced things like this in their lives and in their families. And so it resonates with them. So we tend to, in our debates, home in on 1 or 2 or 3 lines of evidence. But what I found with my students is they're all over the board, different strokes for different folks. I think the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 9 would say, become all things to all men. If this is really some of the stuff that people are fascinated with right now, and there are documentaries out on it, a movie at the movie theater on this just a couple of years ago, called After Death, I believe. People are all over this. Scientists are looking at it now. Become all things to all men and grab them where they're interested. Or else they'll have to go listen to a New Age person explain it.
That's right. Yeah, and that's a real concern that has happened. Yeah, that certainly has happened. Has happened. There's a real draw. So we need to engage in this area, but quite a bit more heavily and attend to it carefully. Yeah. Well, this has been good. Yeah. I think this is a good note to end on. So I'll bring it around to a close for us. Let me try to summarize some things that we've talked about and some applications. One of the recurring themes of this podcast is that theology is never merely an abstract exercise. The deepest theological questions are often the most human questions. Who are we? What happens when we die? Is consciousness reducible to matter? Does personal identity survive bodily death? Deathbed experiences, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences do not answer all those questions. They do not eliminate the need for philosophical reasoning, theological reflection, or faith itself. But they do remind us that human persons may be more mysterious in some ways than many modern accounts allow. At the very least, these experiences invite humility. They challenge us to reconsider assumptions that have been treated as settled. They encourage deeper investigation into the nature of consciousness itself, personhood, the possibility that reality extends beyond what can be measured by purely material means. For Christians, these discussions also point to the larger theological questions about the soul, the intermediate state, the resurrection, and the hope that we have of life after death. While these experiences should never replace Scripture, they may nevertheless prompt us to ask the right sorts of questions, the right sorts of experiential questions, and how it is that we can illuminate what it is that we learn from God's revelation in a richer, deeper, more spiritually significant manner than modern culture often allows. So, Steve, thank you for joining us, helping us to think through these careful matters, giving us kind of a summary and a 30,000-foot view. Thanks to our listeners for joining us on this episode of It's a Theological World After All. Continue pursuing truth, wisdom, and wonder as we seek to understand both the visible and the invisible dimensions of God's world around us. Thanks again.